Hi, this is Jamie Mason Cohen, and this is the Leadership Standard, where we explore real life stories from leaders from across the business spectrum. This is an intimate look and discovery of how they shift between triumphs, struggles, failures, disruptions, future opportunities, and today, regrets. Operating from a philosophy that leaders are made and not born, this podcast and live today reveals how high achievers accelerate through the challenges, win both at work and at home, and lead with confidence while accomplishing their goals. Our guest today is New York Times bestselling author of 7 books, Daniel Pink. Now, with Daniel, what I'm going to do is dive into several of his books that have had an impact on my life and my career transitions over the past 20 years, from We Have Here to Sell is Human and Drive, and his latest book, The Power of Regret, that have helped me working in media as an entrepreneur, education, and leadership development. Now, as we go through this, I'd invite you to ask questions for those who are on the call. Welcome to the Leadership Standard, Daniel.
Jamie, what a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for the kind words.
I appreciate you being here. The first thing I want to ask you about from To Sell is Human is, you spoke of in that book, or alluded to, that sales has changed dramatically in the past decade, more so than the previous decades or even the past 100 years. And there's one particular point that really caught my attention, which is you talk about sales in the past was about being problem solving, and sales today is about unearthing the problems that businesses don't know they have. So my first question to you is, how do you find and surface problems businesses don't know they have?
It's a tough skill to develop. Let me take one step back though, because the move from problem solving to problem finding is a consequence of a deeper change. That's a symptom of the change, not the change itself. The change itself that you're alluding to is this move in sales and any kind of persuasion, any kind of influence, from a world of information asymmetry to a world of information parity, to a world where buyers always had more information where sellers always had more information than buyers, to a world where they're evenly matched. That's a big deal. If you think about it, it's as I've thought about this, in the book, I say, it's a bigger change, I think, in 100 years or something like that. It's actually a bigger change in thousands of years. The entire history of commerce has been, was built around this information asymmetry, where from the earliest commercial transactions, the seller always had more information than the buyer. The buyer didn't have many choices, and the buyer didn't have a way to talk back. That has changed, and that's a big deal. Now, a consequence of that is that problem solving is becoming a bit of a commodity. That is, if your customer or prospect knows precisely what their problem is, they don't need you very much. And if in B2B, they need you to be one of 2 or 3 bidders to drive down the price. Where they need you more, and where your edge comes, is when they don't know, as exactly as you're saying, Jamie, when they don't know what their problem is, when they're wrong about their problem. And so the skill of problem finding is becoming more important than the skill of problem solving. Now, this is a long-winded way to actually answer the question that you pose, which is, how do you develop that? And there are a variety of ways to do that. One of them is truly to develop real expertise. I believe that now there are massive returns to expertise, and massive returns to being able to stay on top of trends and being able to curate the welter of information that is out there. In terms of a particular tactic, I think my favorite is the annoying tactic known as 5 whys, where if someone says they want something or they need something, ask them why, and then when they give you an answer, ask them a second why. When they give you that answer, ask them a third why, and then a fourth why, and a fifth why. And what often will happen is that you will surface what they're really looking for. But again, so that's one technique. Another technique is to talk to as many people in your industry as possible, particularly if you're in sales. Talk to as many people in your industry as possible. Try to understand all of their pain points, and even go into a sales encounter. And let's say I'm calling on you, and instead of trying to sell you whatever it is I'm selling you, say, hey, Jamie, you know what? I call on people like you all the time. You want to hear what their three biggest headaches are, and every single person will say yes. So yeah, so it's a different approach, and your goal is to do it far more succinctly than I answered this question.
Well, I love that. Your three biggest headaches, because that's so tangible and present to them now. When it comes to motivation, in your classic book, Drive, which is about motivation, and you talk about the ABCs of motivation. What are some of the things we can do as employers, for those who are employers on the call, to make sure the people around us are motivated?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so at a starting point, I'll sort of cascade down. At a starting point, what's really important to understand, and this is something that one of the heroes of that book, Edward Deasy, a professor at the University of Rochester in the U.S., told me. He says, we got to get past the idea that motivation is something that one person does to another, and recognize that it's something people do for themselves. And so you can't think about motivation as I'm going to motivate you in this way that I'm sort of directing or controlling your behavior. That's a big mistake. You want to create the environment in which people can motivate themselves. And that environment consists of a set of design principles that are fairly straightforward, very much rooted in evidence, and that are, possible, but not necessarily always easy to enact. So the first one, you have employees, pay them well. All right. So, there's this notion that, we know from a lot of research that intrinsic motivation is really what distinguishes many high performers from less high performers. That intrinsic motivation that comes from within, is the source of much high performance. But that doesn't mean you can scrimp on pay. Absolutely not. You got to pay people well, pay people fairly. And that's incredibly important. There's an art, we can talk about this later. There's an argument in terms of using money as a motivator for paying people enough to take the issue of money off the table, paying people enough so they're focused on the work, not on the money. So once you do that, what really matters are autonomy. So do people have a sense of control over what they do, how they do it, when they do it, where they do it? Mastery. Are they getting better at something that matters? Are they making progress in meaningful work and purpose? Do they know why they're doing what they're doing? Is it in some way, even small, to make a contribution internally or a difference externally? And when we think about motivation that way, about building an environment that allows people to find those things, then I liken it to renewable resources. It's like solar energy. It's not like fossil fuel where you have to burn it up and then dig it out again and burn it up again and dig it out again. It's something that sort of emanates from a natural source, and that is endlessly renewable.
Okay. Wonderful. I want to shift gears here into your latest work, The Power of Regret, how looking backward moves us forward. And this book really helped me reframe and put some perspective on some of my regrets and bust some myths that I was taught by society growing up about regret. So I want to ask that question because I was speaking with Lucy, the producer of this podcast, and we were talking about what we both grew up in different ways, understanding about no regrets.
Yeah.
You're taught that you should say no regrets. And if you dare say you regret something, people give you that kind of weird look, like there's something off about you. Can you talk about the myth of no regrets from the research that you did in this book?
It's so you're exactly right. It is a myth. And the reason we know it's a myth is that there are 60 years of science on this emotion of regret. And what it tells us is that everybody has regrets. Truly, everybody has regrets. We have evidence from social psychology showing that it's one of the most common emotions that human beings have. It's arguably the most common negative emotion that human beings have. It is ubiquitous in the human experience. And truly, the only people who don't have regrets, there are some people who don't have regrets. 5-year-olds don't have regrets because their brains haven't developed the cognitive sophistication to do the time travel and counterfactual thinking that underlies regret. People with certain kinds of neurodegenerative diseases and brain damage don't have regrets, and sociopaths don't have regrets. But otherwise, everybody has regrets. Now, this is I think what makes it so interesting. Regret stinks. I experience regret. I don't like it. When you and Lucy think about your regrets, it made you feel bad. Okay, so why would something so unpleasant be so ubiquitous? And the answer is, I think, a second insight from the science, which is that it's good for you if you treat it right, that it's there for a reason. And I agree with you completely. I mean, I think it's true in Canada. I think it's doubly true in the United States of America, where we have been sold a total bill of goods. I mean, you mentioned sort of like your upbringing, total bill of goods. What we've been told is that the path to a life well lived is to be positive all the time and never be negative, to always look forward and never look back. And that's not accurate. What we should be positive a lot of the time, and we should look forward as being the present a lot of the time. But if we treat our regrets properly, again, not ignoring them, no regrets, but also not wallowing them, they are an incredibly powerful emotion. We have evidence, again, that it helps us think about your viewers and listeners on the business tasks that they have to. It helps us become better negotiators. It helps us become better problem solvers. It helps us become better strategists. It helps us become clearer thinkers. And so if we treat our regrets right, don't ignore them, don't wallow in them, but confront them, think about them. It's actually a transformative emotion. Again, if we do it right.
And on that note, you mentioned decision making. So we have on this call leaders, we have business leaders, we have chairs who run business groups of some of the top entrepreneurs and business leaders in Canada. So you referenced, I don't know if you remember, one study that encouraged business leaders to reflect on their regrets, which exerted a positive influence on their future decisions. Can you talk about the positive benefit of reflecting on regret in terms of decision making?
Yeah, it's actually powerful and transformative. And so what we have is, okay, I'll give you an example for one piece. I'll give you an example of something that executives would do, and for which there's a lot of experimental evidence. Let's take negotiation. Because we have a lot of experimental evidence out there. You put people into a negotiation session. Okay, so and the way that they do experimental negotiation is there's a fairly standard fact pattern that they give to people. You go in with a counterpart and you try to work out a deal. One of the famous ones is selling a gasoline station, a petrol station. And the way the facts are configured, you can make a deal, but it takes some work. Okay, so people go into the negotiation session, then they come out, and the experimenters say, tell me what in the negotiation you regret doing or not doing. Okay, so instead of this no regrets BS, they invite the negative experience. Reflect on what you regret. Stop and think about what you regret. People do better in the next negotiation. The same thing is true with problem solving. It's true with strategy and things like that. And so what we want to do is we want to actually, when we want to think about our regrets, not use the bad feeling as a signal to our brain. Okay, when we feel bad, our instinct sometimes is to shut it off, or sometimes if we lack the capacity, we end up kind of plunging into it and soaking in it. You want to say, oh my God, that bad feeling is a signal to my brain that I need to think about this. What did I learn from this? What lesson can I extract from this? And how can I do better in the future? What lesson can I extract from this? And how can I do better in the future? And in that case, it is a source of improvement. And so abiding by the BS advice that you and I got, that we should never have regrets, that we should never look backward, is actually holding us back. When we actually reflect analytically on our regrets, acknowledge our regrets, draw a lesson from them, and then devise a plan to apply that lesson in the future, it's a transformative and powerful emotion.
So is what you're saying, the purpose of regret is to feel worse today, which helps us be better tomorrow?
Bingo. You said it perfectly. and I think that that's actually really important, because, I'm going to just double click on that, because you said something really important. That is, a lot of us like the do better tomorrow part, but we don't like the feel bad today part. And here's the thing. It's a combo platter, man. You can't have one without the other. That the reason it helps us do better in the future is that it makes us feel bad in the present, because that signal of feeling bad, it's like, wait a second, I did something wrong. This is not the way to do things. And rather than shutting that off or getting debilitated by it, is saying, whoa, hold on a second, I got to pay attention to this. what did I learn from this, and what am I going to do later? And so, and this is hard for, it's, we have this idea, again, going back to your broader point, that the way to live well is to be positive all the time and never be negative. And that's just not true. Negative emotions serve a purpose. You don't want to have a huge number of them. You don't want to be overwhelmed with negative emotions. But if you have only positive emotions, that's going to be a problem. Negative emotions are functional. They are adaptive. And we need to respect them and honor them and learn from them.
One other benefit that's mentioned is regret strengthens our sense of meaning and connectedness. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that you see in terms of what people regret is that they often regret essentially inactions dealing with personal relations. So I had this old friend, Jamie, and I haven't talked to him for 15 years. I wanted to reach out to him, but I didn't. And now it's 5 years later, and I regret not doing that. And now it feels even more awkward. I had a relative, and they were older, and I've had every intent to go see them, and I wanted to do that, but I didn't, and they passed away, and now I regret that. So when you look at the substance of what people regret, it gives us clues about what people really value in life, and therefore guidance on how to live better.
Yeah, that was fascinating, because with that, I think it was the most widespread survey ever done that you conducted, the American Regret Project, with 4,489 people who did it, including me, a little bit after the fact. What I found fascinating was what people regretted the most, and family was at the top, and relationships, I think, followed after, and then career, finances came a little bit afterwards. They weren't at the bottom, but they still were quite prominent. What examples can you think of? Now, I know there was thousands, but in terms of the research, did people regret with regard to their career?
Yeah, we have a lot of evidence on that, and so I did two surveys. One was that American Regret Project, which was a quantitative survey, essentially a public opinion poll of the U.S. population. And I think the two most salient findings of that were, number one, that when you ask people about the behavior of regret, without calling it regret, so we asked them, how often do you look back on your life and wish you had done things differently? So we describe regret, but we don't use the R word. We found 83% of Americans saying they do it at least occasionally, because they're human. And then the other thing that came out in that quantitative survey, big time, was that people regret inactions way more than they regret actions. That's a huge finding, and that gap widens as people age. So, and you're exactly right that when we asked what people regretted, we found a pretty good variety of things. But when it comes to, but when you actually sort of cut it a different way, and I did another survey where we simply collected regrets from people around the world. We now have a database of over 25,000 of them from 100 countries. One of the things that comes out, and this is the answer to your question, Jamie, on career, is boldness. In many cases throughout our lives, we're at a juncture in our lives, and the juncture gives us kind of a binary choice. You can play it safe, or you can take the chance. You can stay in your lackluster job, or you can try to start your own business. You can let things go on at work and not get in trouble, or you can speak up. And when people don't take the chance, not all the time, but much of the time, they regret it. And so this goes to inaction. We regret inactions more than actions, and we particularly regret inactions that have to do with boldness. And I think what's interesting here is that I think that the mechanism that's powering, the engine that's driving this for career regrets is the same thing that is the same engine that is driving people's regrets about not traveling, about not asking somebody out on a date. That is, we tend to be, I think in our present decision-making, we tend to be a little over-indexed on risk. And as a consequence, don't do things because we've overestimated how risky they are. And then retrospectively, we end up regretting it.
And just by the process of reading your book, I mean, I find your books are evidence-based, fluff-free,
Thank you.
yeah, it's true, and inspiring in the sense that I can walk away and immediately feel transformed, and I don't use that word lightly. And for me, for this particular book, I reflected on some of my regrets, and I gave myself permission, maybe for the first time in my life, to do so. So one of those regrets was, I believe, a boldness regret, which was I was working for Lorne Michaels at Saturday Night Live and his empire in my 20s. And when my visa expired, I ended up coming back to Canada, coming back to Toronto. And my side project working for Lorne was I created a vlog slash podcast before that even existed, where I interviewed top authors, people like you, fiction authors like William Boyd, Academy Award nominated and winning screenwriters like Stephen Gaghan. And it got great feedback. And as soon as I left that job, I left it. And about 10 years later, I thought, why the heck did I stop doing that vlog way ahead of what we now know, which are omniscient? Everyone has a vlog and a podcast. And I believe that by doing this, which I guess it was on a subconscious level, I host this podcast, I host my own podcast, and it somehow has come full circle that in my 40s, I am following through and coming full circle and learning from my regret of stopping a good thing that I had and being a little more bold moving forward. So that's something that really helped me bring to fruition a regret that I learned from, and that now I have become better for it.
I mean, that's a very healthy way to process it, Jamie. Like you could have gone another way. You could have said, if only I kept doing that blog. Oh, it doesn't matter. I got to look forward. I can't be negative. I gotta, be positive. Then you don't learn anything. Or you could say, oh my God, if only I had started, everything would be different. I'm such an idiot. I can't believe this. I'm a total wimp. I'm not good. That's bad too. What you want to do is you're saying, okay, this feels bad right now. Feeling bad is a signal. It's a signal to your brain. What did I learn from this, and what am I going to do about it? And then you end up with doing better in the future. And I think that sort of implied in what you were saying at the early part of your story was that, I think you used the phrase, gave yourself permission. I think that was the phrase that you used. And I think that that's absolutely on the right track. What we want to try to do is normalize this emotion, because it's normal.
It's normal. Even with raising kids, I told my son not to cry the other day, and I was devastated in that moment. I said to my wife, I didn't tell him to stop crying. I wouldn't want someone when I was 11-year-old to say that. So the next day, instead of being hard on myself, I just shifted and said, do you need a hug? How can I, it's okay to have that emotion. So I think it helps on on a bigger level. And it also helps on the day-to-day. So, thank you for normalizing it through the way that you've simplified and clarified what it really means.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And when it comes to parenting, I think one thing that is useful for parents is for parents just to talk about, a regret that they have with their kids, and but don't leave it there.
Yeah.
Don't. I regret. You have to actually pull the string a little further along. Here's a regret that I have. Here's what I learned from it, and here's what I'm going to do about it. And that helps normalize it too.
It helps normalize it. Here's a question from our audience. From an excellent leader, Morrow. He asks, purpose, mastery, and autonomy. So we're going back a bit here to what we spoke earlier. He's used it as a chair, as a leader. He's one of the top leaders who facilitates these tech groups. He said, how does regret's theme fit that model of purpose, mastery, and autonomy?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think in a couple of ways. Certainly on mastery, I think that being able to reflect on your regrets is important in achieving mastery. If you don't do that, you're not gonna get any better. So if, as a writer, I don't reflect on, I regret, writing about that, or writing about that in this way. If I don't reflect on that, then I risk making the same mistake again. I risk not improving. So that's mastery. I think the other thing that's super interesting to Morrow's question has to do with purpose, because again, one of the revelatory things about this emotion of regret is that it tells us what we truly care about. It tells us what really matters to us. And, so if you think about it, you mentioned decision making earlier, Jamie. You and I are talking, today is Friday. And so just think about yesterday, you and I, all right, yesterday's a Thursday. You and I each made dozens, maybe hundreds of decisions yesterday. Hundreds of actions, decisions, inactions. It's Friday. We don't even remember most of those, right? The next day. And yet there are certain decisions and indecisions, actions and inactions, things we did or things we didn't do, that from a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, that not only do we remember them, they bother us. That's a very, very strong signal. It's a signal of what you really care about. And so if you have a regret, you, Jamie, have a regret about boldness, what it suggests to me is that you care about learning and growth, that it's giving you insight into your values, that not everybody has a boldness regret of the kind that you have. But it seems like, well, I have to actually contribute to the world. I actually have to do as best that I can do. And when I don't do that, that bugs me. That's a clarification of your values, a clarification of your purpose. And so I do think that there is, I think that they can work in concert. I don't want to suggest that there's this kind of mechanical sort of, the gears are inextricably linked between those concepts, but there is an affinity between them, particularly when it comes to mastery and purpose.
Okay. Let me ask you, what's one regret you have? And how did you reframe it or put it into some perspective?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of regrets, especially when I was younger. It's interesting. A lot of my regrets, not as I think about it, a lot of my regrets occurred before I was basically before I was 25 or 30. Now, at a certain point, one has to kind of demonstrate some compassion for oneself, because it's easy, it's easy from the vantage point of a 50-something to be critical of the decision-making of a 20-something, right? So, but categorically, one of the big regrets, it still bothers me to this day, are regrets about kindness. Where I was in situations where people I was not a bully. I would never bully. I don't think I ever bullied anybody. But regrets of kindness, where I saw people not being treated well, where I saw people being treated unfairly. And I saw it. I knew it was wrong. And I didn't do anything. And that bugs me, even to this day. Now, what do I do with that? I can ignore it. I can wallow in, or I can say, wow, stuff I did 25 years ago bugs me. I guess I must value kindness more than I might realize. And so how do I bring that forward? Particularly when it comes to people being left out. I guess, people who know me or see me in action could testify to this, but so it's a small thing. So when I'm in like a social setting or something like that, and I see, a lot of times, like, you're in a sort of a meeting or even like a social gathering, and there'll be kind of clumps of people talking, and every once in a while you'll see, fairly often actually, you see one person kind of marooned on his or her own, and I will almost always now try to reach out, find that person, bring them into the group, widen the circle that I'm in to invite other people in. And I would never do that in the past. And I do that now because I don't want to feel crappy for not doing it, as I did for decades.
Well, from our experience in emailing back and forth, and I know on behalf of the Tech Canada team, you've shown us nothing but kindness and respect.
Thanks.
And for all of us who are listening on this call, whose lives you've impacted, both professionally and personally, through your work, whether it's the books or the videos, your TEDx talk to this day is one that I reflect on yearly. I want to thank you. And really, the quote that I want to end off with on the power of regret is, if we look backward and move forward, seizing what we can control and putting aside what we cannot, crafting on our own redemptive stories, it can be liberating. So I want to thank you, because it was liberating, and it is liberating for me. It's given me a sense of peace, and moving forward, it's much clearer to me how I can create perspective around what I regret, so that it's something that can help me move forward.
Well, it's very kind of you to say that, Jamie. So I'm glad that you chose this line of work rather than sticking with Lorne Michaels.
Me too. Don't tell him though. So if you haven't already, pick up The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward by Daniel Pink. Thank you so much, Daniel. And this is the Leadership Standard, where we believe that leaders are made and not born. So subscribe if you haven't already, and we look forward to seeing you soon.